Welcome to a new video. In this video, we're going to be looking at the useEffect hook in React. The useEffect is going to allow us to run side effects in our application. So let's dive right in and see how we can use the useEffect inside of our React applications. So a little definition first. The useEffect hook is is a function that allows developers to perform side effects in their functional components. A side effect in React typically includes things like fetching data from an API, updating the DOM, or setting up event listeners. So side effects refers to any code that affects something outside the scope of the component itself, such as making API requests, manipulating the DOM, or subscribing to event listeners. So the reason why we use the useEffect to execute any side effects is that it provides a consistent and predictable way to handle them. By placing the side effect code inside of the useEffect, we can ensure that it runs after every render of the component. And we're gonna have some options to play around with that. I'll show you in the code. And this is important because the components can re-render multiple times due to the state changes or the prop changes. So here is a few other reasons why we run side effects inside of the useEffect hooks. So we're going to accomplish a consistent execution as when we put the side effect code inside of the useEffect hooks. We're going to prevent running into infinity loops because we're going to be able to control when this code is going to be executed or not. We can also do some cleanup after every time the component runs. We can do some cleanup operations as well. We'll do an example with a cleanup function that we're going to have available inside of the useEffect. And also creates a separation of concerns. So a separation of concerns is just separating your UI logic from the useEffect logic and don't have those two mix up in the same code. So let's take a look at the useEffect hook. So let's open up the first link, the starter link, in a new tab, and let's click on fork so we can create a new copy of this. Now that we have forked the starter code, we're going to import the useEffect hook. So useEffect, we're going to import that from the React library. And the useEffect is a function, so we're going to go inside of the app component here, or any component. We're just going to do in the app for this example. And we're going to call the useEffect just like you call a regular function. The useEffect is going to take in two arguments. The first argument that is going to take is going to be a callback function, and also can take a optional empty array, which is going to be your array of dependencies. Right now, I'm going to not pass the second argument and just pass the callback function. Inside of the callback function is where we're going to run any side effect code. So let's just put a console log here to show you that this will run automatically as soon as the component mounts. So let's just type performing some side effects. And then if you open up your console, you can see that the code inside right now is just a console log, is running automatically as soon as the component mounts. And if we not pass in any array in here as the second argument, this code inside will also run after every time the component re-renders. If you want the code inside of the useEffect to only run the first time when the component mounts, you can pass in an empty array like so. And this is going to ensure that the code inside only runs once, the first time the component mounts. So in here, let's delete the console log. And let's do some DOM manipulation just to show you that we can grab any elements. Right now we have this h1. Let's go ahead and grab it. So So h1 equals document that query selector. Let's just grab the h1 element. Let's console log it just to see that we are grabbing this. We can see it at the bottom here. Now let's just change the text. So let's do h1 and dot text content, set that equals to React shorts, like so, and we're changing the h1, right? So you can do you can access the DOM. This is a side effect because you are reaching out to a separate API. You're going outside of the React library using the DOM API to go and do some side effects, right? So you can do anything that you need on the DOM inside of the useEffect if you like. Also, you can have multiple side effects or useEffect hooks in the same component. So let's just do another one here. So let's call the useEffect again. And let's pass in our first argument, which is the callback function. And I'm going to pass in my empty array of dependencies right away. And on this one, we're going to reach out to a third-party API to go ahead and grab some data. So this is the operation that you're going to be doing the most. Reaching out to some API, grabbing some data, putting that data into the state, and mapping over that data. So we're just going to do a quick example just to focus on the useEffect. And then later on, we're going to build an application where we're going to put the state and the useEffect together. So let's grab the URL down here. So we can go ahead and make an API call to this third-party API. So inside of the useEffect, this callback cannot be marked as a async function. So let's just define a new function here, which is going to be called fetch data. So let's say const fetch data. And this function is going to be a asynchronous function, async. And this function is going to go ahead and reach out to this third-party API. So let's do create a variable called rest for response equals await. Let's use the fetch API to reach out to this third-party API. Right, so after our fetch request comes back, we want to grab the response and we're going to parse the data. So rest and .json. So we can parse the data and then we should be able to go ahead and console log the data. Like so. So right now, nothing is happening because this is only your function definition in here. We just created it here just to keep this example short. And then after you define your function, you can just call your function down here. And then this will execute as soon as the component mounts. And you can see in the console, you can see your 200 to-dos. We are reaching out to this JSON placeholder to grab some dummy to-dos so we can display some data or console log the data right now. So if you open those up, you can see each one of those is each to-do is an object with the user ID of the to-do, title, and complete properties. So now we're reaching out to a third-party API, grab some data. Now with that data, you can put it into a state variable and map over that at this point. But we're going to do that in a separate video. So just want to keep this simple here. And I want to do one more example so I can show you the cleanup function. So for this one, we are going to use the useEffect, the useState hook just to create a variable here called timer. Because we're going to create a timer that will count up to 10. So we're going to create a timer, state variable, and a set timer setter function. Then we're going to call the useEffect, the useState, and initialize that to 0 because we're going to be counting up to 1, all the way to 10, one by one. And let's use another useEffect here to create this timer. useEffect, we're going to pass in a callback function for the useEffect and an empty array. So here we are going to, let me move this a little bit to the right. So here we're going to use our set interval. So the set interval is going to run some code um, uh, consecutively, and depending on the amount of time that you set on the set interval. So let's grab, also we need to grab the ID of the set interval so we can clear that interval inside of our cleanup function from the useEffect. So here let's create a variable called interval ID, and we're going to call the set interval function. And to the set interval, we pass in a callback function, and in here we're going to put the code we want to execute every 1000 millisecond, which is 1 second. And here all we want to do is grab the timer. So we're going to use the set timer function. So set timer, and we're going to access the previous value, previous timer, and we're going to in here we're going to increase it by 1. So let's do a return previous timer plus equals 1, right? So we can increase that. And also we want to have an if statement because we only want to count up to 10. We're going to say if previous timer is equals to 10, just return 0, so we can start from 0 again. If it's not 10, return previous timer plus equals 1. Previous is not defined. I think this is, you can ignore that for now. This is just code sandbox, some code sandbox error here. So in here we have the if statement, we have the return previous timer plus equals 1, so we can increase. Let's console log the timer here. So let's do a console log, console.log the word timer and then the timer, so we can see if it's working. Oops, not that, oops. And right now we're getting a not a number. So let's see timer in here. So set timer is our setter function. If set timer is equals to 10, return 0, return previous timer plus equals 1. Okay, so right now, let's see what I'm missing here. We have the timer down here. Okay, so let me put some spaces here. Set interval, and then the timer. For the timer, let me see what I'm doing here. Okay, set timer. This is the function. We're grabbing the previous timer. If timer is equals to 10, that's fine. Else return previous timer plus equals 1. Console log timer. Let's see, something is not properly executed. Let me refresh this here because I think this is just a error, a reference error here. Let me refresh here, see if it helps. Timer is 0. Okay, so right now the timer, it looks like it's working now. Right now we cannot see anything on the console log, and that's because your timer is not changing. If you scroll over the yellow lines here, it says the React code has a missing dependency. This is because now the code here depends on a value, right, on the timer value in order to work. So what we need to do is we're gonna grab this timer, we're gonna paste it inside of the dependencies array so we can execute the code not only the first time but also every single time and the timer changes. So because we want to make sure this keeps running so we can keep increasing our timer. Right now is kind of working, but you see that we're getting some weird numbers in here. And that is because of the set interval. We need to clear out that ID from each time this runs. We need to call this here. Right now we're going to try to do a return. This is our cleanup function. We're going to pass in a inline function here. And right now this is slow because we need to clear interval. Oh, it's slowing down so bad right now. We're going to paste the interval there like so to see if we can clean up that timer. Right now it's just really slow because we need to make sure we clean up that timer, the interval here. Let me refresh one more time, see if we can get this to run properly. Come on, let me refresh the page entirely. Come on. It was so many IDs that the code sandbox just couldn't take it. All right, so I have to close the tab and reopen the tab because it crashed my code sandbox. But now that we're cleaning up our interval in here, we can see our console logs. Make sure you close the tab if the same thing happened to you and refresh the application by clicking on refresh. We can see the timer working in here now. Because in the cleanup function, we are clearing out that interval. Each interval, we're cleaning that up and then running one more in the useEffect and then clear that again. And now our timer will count from 0 all the way up to 10. And then when it hits 10, it will return back to 0. If you wanted to display that into an H2, you could do that here now and say timer and pass in the timer value and close that H2 if you wanted to display it like so. You have your timer that will count up to 10, back to 0, and that's it. So we saw 3 different examples on how to set up how to use our useEffect. So in the next application, we're going to use the useEffect to reach out to our third party, we're going to use the same link to create a application, and then we're going to put together everything we learned so far. So this is it for now. I'll see you next video, and let's create our first application together. See you there.